Welcome back to SERA Mythology. Last time, we went to ancient India. We stood in a demon king's palace and watched a pillar explode into divine fire. We met a child who survived everything his father could throw at him because he held on to something that no force in the universe could take. Today we cross the world. We are going to ancient Greece. To a story so old, so layered, so rich with meaning that it has never left the human imagination. Artists have painted it for 2,000 years. Poets have rewritten it in every century. Psychologists have used it as a mirror for the darkest parts of the mind. Scientists have even named a real phenomenon in biology after its central figure. And yet most people who know this story only know the surface. The monster. The hero. The sword. The severed head. Today we go deeper. This is the story of Medusa. And I want to begin not where most tellings begin, but at the real beginning. Because the version of Medusa most people know is not the oldest version. And the oldest version changes everything. Let us start with what she was before she became what she became. In the very earliest Greek sources, Medusa was one of 3 sisters known as the Gorgons. The other 2 were Stheno and Euryale. Their names translate roughly as the Strong One and the Far Springer. And Medusa's name, this name that has echoed through 3,000 years, means the guardian, or the protectress, or, in some readings, the queen. In the oldest accounts, all 3 Gorgons were born as monsters, terrifying creatures of the deep with bronze hands, golden wings, and serpents writhing where their hair should be. Daughters of Phorcys and Ceto, ancient sea deities who represented the dangerous, unknowable depths of the ocean. Medusa was mortal. Her sisters were immortal. That distinction, as we will see, matters enormously. But then something happened in the tradition. As Greek mythology evolved across the centuries, as poets and philosophers and dramatists added their layers, a new story emerged. And this new story transformed Medusa from a creature born monstrous into something far more troubling, far more human, and far more powerful. In the version told by the Roman poet Ovid, which is the version that shaped the Western imagination for the last 2,000 years, Medusa was not always a Gorgon. She was born a woman, beautiful beyond description. Her hair, specifically, was described as her greatest glory, dark and lustrous and extraordinary. And this beauty drew the attention of Poseidon, god of the sea, the second most powerful deity in the Greek pantheon after Zeus himself. Poseidon assaulted Medusa in the temple of Athena. I want to say that plainly because the ancient sources say it plainly, and what happens next in the story only makes sense if we sit with the full horror of that fact. An immortal being of absolute power violated a mortal woman in the sacred space of another goddess. And Athena, goddess of wisdom and warfare and justice, was furious. But not at Poseidon. At Medusa. Athena transformed Medusa's beautiful hair into living serpents. She turned her face into something so terrible that any living creature who looked directly at it would be turned to stone. She made her a Gorgon. She made her monstrous. She made her lethal. And then she essentially exiled her to the edge of the world, to a place near the realm of the dead, where Medusa lived alone, or with her immortal sisters, surrounded by the stone statues of every man who had ever looked at her. Now I want to pause here, because this is the moment where mythology becomes philosophy. Where an ancient story stops being just a story and starts being a question that a civilization is asking itself about justice, about power, about who pays the price when the powerful do wrong. The ancient Greeks did not unanimously present Athena's punishment of Medusa as just. Some sources read it as deeply unjust. A victim punished for being victimized. A woman transformed into a weapon by the very trauma inflicted on her. Her body itself made into an instrument that destroys everyone who looks at her. There is a reading of Medusa's story that is not about a monster at all. It is about what happens to a person when the world responds to their suffering by making them more dangerous and more isolated. When instead of being seen and held and healed, they are turned into something that cannot be touched, cannot be approached, cannot be truly known by anyone. Medusa became unreachable. And that is perhaps the most accurate and devastating thing any mythology has ever said about what certain kinds of pain can do to a person. But I am getting ahead of myself. Because now we must meet the hero. Perseus was the son of Zeus and a mortal woman named Danae. His grandfather, a king named Acrisius, had received a prophecy from the oracle at Delphi that he would one day be killed by his own grandson. So Perseus did what terrified rulers throughout mythology always do when they receive prophecies they don't like. He tried to prevent it. He locked Danae in a bronze chamber underground, reasoning that if she never met a man, she could never bear a son. Zeus, as Zeus tends to do in these stories, found a way in any way, appearing to Danae as a shower of golden rain. When Perseus was born, Perseus did not kill the child directly, perhaps fearing divine punishment for murdering a son of Zeus. Instead, he sealed Danae and the infant Perseus in a wooden chest and cast them into the sea, reasoning that the sea could do what he would not. The sea, as often happens in Greek mythology, did not cooperate. The chest washed ashore on the island of Seriphos, where a fisherman named Dictys found them and took them in. Dictys was kind. His brother Polydectes, the king of Seriphos, was not. Polydectes wanted Danae, and Danae did not want Polydectes. And Perseus, growing up, was the obstacle between Polydectes and whatever he wanted to do about that. So Polydectes devised a scheme. He announced that he was going to marry another woman entirely and expected all his nobles to bring gifts for the bride. Perseus, young and proud and without resources, boasted that he could bring any gift the king named, even the head of Medusa herself. Polydectes named that gift, and Perseus, bound by his own words, had to find a way to do the impossible. Here is where the gods stepped in. And this is where I want to draw your attention to a pattern that runs through the mythology of almost every culture on Earth: the hero who cannot succeed alone. Perseus needed help, and the help came from unexpected directions. Athena herself came to Perseus. The same goddess who had cursed Medusa came to help the hero who would kill her. She gave him a polished bronze shield, reflective as a mirror, and told him that he must never look directly at Medusa. He could only approach her through the reflection. Hermes, the messenger god, the deity of crossroads and travelers and the space between things, gave Perseus a curved sword, the harp, specifically designed for this task. But Perseus still needed to find Medusa. And for that, he had to find the Graeae. The Graeae were 3 ancient sisters, gray-haired from birth, sharing between them a single eye and a single tooth. They passed these between themselves continuously. Perseus crept up to them and snatched the eye as they passed it from one to another, and he held it hostage until they told him what he needed to know, the location of the nymphs who held the remaining tools he needed for his quest. From those nymphs he received 3 more gifts. The cabesus, a special sack capable of holding the Gorgon's head safely after it was severed. The sandals of Hermes, winged sandals that allowed him to fly. And the helm of Hades, the cap of invisibility. Armed with these divine gifts, guided by the gods, Perseus flew to the edge of the world. He found Medusa sleeping. And this is the most famous moment. Perseus, holding his bronze shield up and watching only the reflection in its surface, moved through the sleeping Gorgons and found Medusa. He raised the harp, and without looking at her, guided only by her mirror image, he struck. The instant he severed her head, 2 things burst from her body. 2 children of Poseidon, who had been waiting, impossibly, inside her since the moment of their creation. The winged horse Pegasus, white as sea foam, who would become one of the most beloved creatures in all of Greek mythology. And Chrysaor, the golden warrior, whose name means golden sword. Even in death, Medusa gave life. Perseus placed the head in the cabesus without looking at it, put on the helm of invisibility as Stheno and Euryale woke screaming, and fled unseen through the sky. But the story was not finished. Not remotely. Flying home over Africa, Perseus passed over Libya, and drops of Medusa's blood fell from the bag. Where the blood touched the desert sand, it transformed. Every drop became a serpent. This is actually one of the Greek mythological explanations for why Libya was said to be full of snakes, a piece of sacred geography woven into the story. The blood of Medusa seeding the earth with new life, even in death. Then Perseus came to the edge of the world and found Atlas, the Titan condemned to hold the heavens on his shoulders forever. Atlas refused Perseus' hospitality, and Perseus, perhaps recklessly, drew the Gorgon's head from the bag and showed it to Atlas. Atlas turned to stone, to a mountain. And the ancient Greeks believed that the Atlas Mountains of North Africa were the petrified remains of that Titan, his stone shoulders still holding up the sky. Then Perseus found Andromeda. He was flying over the coast of Ethiopia, which in ancient Greek geography was a vague somewhere at the edge of the known world, when he saw a woman chained to a rock above a churning sea. A sea monster moved through the water below her. Andromeda's mother, the queen Cassiopeia, had boasted that her daughter was more beautiful than the Nereids, the sea nymphs attendant to Poseidon. Poseidon, who takes many things personally, sent the monster Cetus to ravage the coastline. The oracle declared that only the sacrifice of Andromeda would appease the beast. And so she had been chained there, waiting. Perseus killed Cetus. He freed Andromeda. He asked her father for her hand in marriage. The father agreed. They were betrothed. And then her previous betrothed, a man named Phineus, arrived at the wedding feast with armed men and absolutely no intention of letting this play out peacefully. A battle erupted. And Perseus, outnumbered, did what Perseus does. He warned those loyal to him to look away. And he held up the head of Medusa. The hall turned to stone. Eventually Perseus returned to Seriphos, found that Polydectes had been tormenting his mother, and used the head one final time. The entire court, the king and all his men, stone. Dictys, the kind fisherman, became king of Seriphos. Perseus gave the head of Medusa to Athena, who placed it on her shield, the Aegis, where it remained as her symbol of power for eternity. The Gorgonian, the image of Medusa's terrible face, became one of the most powerful protective symbols in the ancient world. It was carved on temple walls, painted on shields, worn as amulets. The very face that turned men to stone became the face that protected. And Perseus, flying with Andromeda, fulfilled the prophecy he was supposed to be born to fulfill. At the athletic games, he threw a discus. The wind caught it. It flew wide. And in the crowd, it struck an old man and killed him. The old man was Acrisius, his grandfather, who had fled there to escape his fate. The prophecy, as always, worked through the very actions taken to prevent it. Now I want to zoom out. Because as with every story we explore on SERA Mythology, this one carries extraordinary resonance across the world's traditions. The image of the mirror as the only safe way to confront something dangerous, to look at a thing's reflection rather than the thing itself, this is one of the most enduring metaphors in all of human thought. It appears in Islamic mysticism, where certain dangerous spiritual states can only be approached indirectly. It appears in the Hindu tradition of Maya. The idea that the world as we perceive it directly is a kind of illusion and truth requires an indirect, purified mode of perception. It appears in psychoanalysis, where Freud and Jung both argued that the most dangerous parts of the psyche cannot be faced directly but must be approached through reflection, through the mediated distance of therapy and interpretation. Perseus's shield is not just a tool. It is a philosophy. Some truths are too powerful, too blinding, too dangerous to look at directly. You need a surface, a medium, a reflection. Art, mythology, therapy, prayer. These are all bronze shields. They allow us to approach what would otherwise destroy us. The Gorgon's face itself, this idea of the look that kills, appears across world mythology with remarkable consistency. In West African Vodun tradition, there are spiritual forces whose direct gaze or encounter can be fatal without proper ritual preparation. In Japanese mythology, the underworld deity Izanami was not to be seen directly by the living. In multiple Native American traditions, certain sacred beings and forces can only be approached through specific ritual mediations. The idea that some forms of the sacred or the terrible require an indirect approach is not Greek. It is human. And Medusa specifically has taken on new life in the modern world in ways that would astonish the ancient Greeks. In 1941, psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud wrote an essay specifically about Medusa's head, analyzing it as a symbol of male fear of the feminine. In 1975, the philosopher Helene Sixus wrote a landmark feminist essay called The Laugh of the Medusa, reclaiming the figure as a symbol of female power and creative force. The biologist coined the name Medusa for jellyfish, those strange, radially symmetrical creatures with trailing tentacles that look, if you use some imagination, like a head of serpent hair floating through the water. Medusa is in our biology. Medusa is in our philosophy. Medusa is in our art and our architecture and our psychology. She has never left. And I think the reason she never leaves is because her story contains something that every human being at some point has felt. The experience of being transformed by something that was done to you. Of becoming something difficult, something dangerous, something that others cannot approach, not because of who you are but because of what happened to you. And the question her story poses, the question it has always posed, is not whether Medusa deserved her fate. It is what we do with people who have been made monstrous by their wounds. Do we send heroes to cut off their heads? Or do we find another way? The ancient world did not have a clear answer. Neither do we. But the fact that the question is still alive, still urgent, still painful, 3,000 years after a Greek poet first set it down, tells you everything about why mythology matters. Perseus found a way through the impossible. He used reflection instead of direct sight. He accepted help from gods and nymphs and even his enemies. He was brave, yes. But more than brave, he was willing to not look directly at the thing that terrified him. And Medusa, even in death, gave the world Pegasus, the winged horse, the symbol of poetic inspiration, of elevation, of the creative spirit that rises from the darkest places. Every poem ever written, every story ever told, every myth we are exploring together on this podcast, in some small symbolic sense, carries the bloodline of Medusa. She gave us the tools to fly. This has been episode 2 of SERA Mythology. We began in the stone forest at the edge of the world. We met a woman whose suffering was used against her. We followed a young hero who learned that wisdom sometimes means refusing to look at a thing directly. And we found, buried at the heart of one of the most famous monster stories in human history, something that is not about monsters at all. Next time, we cross another ocean. We go somewhere older, somewhere darker, somewhere that shaped the imagination of an entire civilization before Greece was Greece. We go to Mesopotamia, to the very first story ever written down by human hands, to a king who lost everything and walked to the edge of the universe to ask one question: what happens when we die? I will see you at the next one.